Awesome. Good morning. John, good afternoon. Ryan, good morning.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining today. We got a fascinating conversation over the next hour here. My esteemed guest, John Pryor, former auctioneer, trade secret specialist, and IP, practitioner. And Ryan, I'll let you guys do intros. John, why don't you kick things off, and then Ryan will talk about his past.
Tim's the only person in the world who would introduce me as an auctioneer.
You're very good at it. So,
well, no. To be fair, I think people kind of you guys particularly liked the fact that I have a sort of English accent, and that sort of seemed to go down quite well. Tim and I used to work at ICAP, IP and patent brokerage, and we had some really good times over about a 4-year period. Where we honed our IP and particularly our patent skills. And then, since then, we've both gone separate ways to a degree. We've both gone through the top 4 consultancies, me on the IP side, and I think Tim more on the cyber information data side. And then we sort of reconvened back in, I focus a lot on trade secrets, and Tim's coming at trade secrets from the cyber and the data side. So, yeah, very excited about today's discussion. So that's me. Sorry. Over to you, Ryan.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm the odd man out. I'm actually the boots on the ground kind of guy that tries to run these programs that are dictated to me. So I do my best. My background is Army counterintelligence. I spent 26 years in the United States Army. The last 16 years, I was a counterintelligence special agent. Worked in the JSOC community. Worked in other classified programs. Ran counterintelligence programs both in the United States, Europe, and in Korea for 3 years. And so great background in counterintelligence. And so let me define counterintelligence before I go forward, because I think there might be some misunderstanding of what counterintelligence is. And in its simplest forms, I would say it's the practice of keeping enemies outside your walls while catching the ones inside. And so that we are purely about protecting intellectual property, protecting organizations, the employees, facilities, and that's our whole shtick. We're not the guys that go out and try to steal other people's information. That's not our job. We're on the protection side of it. After leaving the Army in 2016, I went straight corporate, and I built counterintelligence and insider threat programs, which is a word, again, that we'll discuss later. I have personal feelings about it, but I did set these programs up at both the Cerner Corporation and ChenMed. So I did that for about 8 or 9 years, and now I'm the executive vice president for commercial offerings at a counterintelligence company called IXN Solutions. Thank you, Tim. Over to you.
Awesome. So a little bit of my background. John and I met, it's been quite a while, 2010. Call it the heyday of the patent monetization world, selling and auctioneering patents, patent licenses, IP. And I went off to work at Deloitte for a couple of years. And during that time, I transitioned over into cybersecurity. And cybersecurity, really focused on, call it right of boom detection, helping in the SOC, which is, 24/7 monitoring for threats and things like that, for incidents. And then I went off into the channel, the term MSP, managed service, provider, outsourced IT providers. So working with small businesses, medium-sized businesses and startups. So it kind of shifted things a little bit. And during that time, it's interesting because there's really been this collision with IP and cybersecurity, and maybe John can talk about that a little bit. But patent, companies used to really depend on patents to drive their intellectual property strategy, which is a very public process, right? You are declaring your claims, you're declaring your inventions, you're declaring your kind of specs. So there's been this shift over into trade secret, and trade secret is all about keeping things confidential, right? And keeping things that are proprietary in-house. So it really falls directly kind of into that fits nicely into that cybersecurity bucket. And I think, Ryan's history is great with counterintelligence. And as you said, keeping the good, the assets inside the house and keeping the bad guys out really lines into that. So what are we talking about today? I think, this is an interesting subject line, which John and we were kicking around about a month ago, is privacy data is a liability. And I guess we could talk about that a little bit. And proprietary data is an asset. And I think a lot of cybersecurity efforts are really focused on PII, PHI, PCI, regulated privacy data and keeping that safe. And, for argument's sake, most companies, I don't think, spend equal amount of investment or effort on protecting proprietary data, which John will talk about. What is proprietary data? What is trade secrets? And maybe we can talk about, why we're making this argument that it doesn't get quite the same love that privacy data does. So, John, do you want to kick that off? Like, what is proprietary data, or what are trade secrets?
Yeah. I mean, why so important? I mean, as Tim's already said, when we're back in the heyday of patent monetization, it's worthwhile investing a lot of money in patents, without any doubt. There were then some changes at the USPTO, the US courts, which made it less easy for you to sort of assert your patents in the US courts. And it's gone so far, the pendulum has swung so far now, that in 78% of the cases, now bear in mind, if you're taking your patent to court, you believe it's a really good patent. So if you're asserting that patent, it's not one of your weak ones, it's one of your good ones. 78% of those claims in those patents are found to be invalid by the very people that granted you that patent in the first place. So, 80% almost of patents are found to be invalid pretty much by the very people who granted them in the first place. So you cannot rely on patents anymore. You definitely need patents, don't get me wrong, but you cannot rely on them. And then, overriding that, as Ryan's going to tell us, and Tim will allude to, is the fact that information flows have been happening at the most excessive rates in the last 20 years, facilitated, of course, by the internet. And that means that information which has always flowed easily is now flowing far more easily. And so governments have got behind trade secrets as a way to contain and sort of protect that information. So patents have sort of faded a little bit, if you like. Trade secrets have really risen strongly. And so proprietary information does cover technical and innovative information like like patents, but it also covers commercial information. For example, customer lists, for example, your profitability information pre-release, and all that kind of good information within the business, launch information, and so on and so forth. So it covers a whole range of things. And the point is that, many people on today's podcast might actually object to us saying, well, actually there's too much focus on privacy data rather than proprietary data. And I would substantiate that statement by saying that actually, although you think you're protecting some of your proprietary data, you haven't taken the steps to protect and defend it using trade secrets legislation. And we can come on to that later. And that really is the nux and the nub of the issue. So let's just put our cards on the table. We're now in the day and the age where the vast majority of the value of any business is intangible, protected by IP. Most people have substantial data, information, confidential and sensitive information assets that should be protected by trade secrets. But unless you take the basic steps, you will not stand up in court and defend those as trade secrets, and you will probably lose that flow of information. Back to you, Tim.
Awesome. Yeah. So trade secrets, right? And I talk about this all the time. Every organization, could be a nonprofit, could be literally a church, could be a restaurant, right? They all have trade secrets. None of that is patentable, right? I mean, patent standards have gotten tougher, right? The Alice decision, you can kind of walk through myriad, like all these major decisions. It's gotten harder and harder to patent things. And at the same time, trade secret litigation, and John and I like to work backwards from these big cases, thinking Monday morning quarterback, what could we have done 4 years ago to have won in court and really, prevailed on our IP rights. So trade secret litigation and case law has really, pointed to what are these distinct things that I can do at my organization to protect my IP and proprietary data. That the ROI is just there. And while it's started to diminish in the patent world, in the trade secret world, it's gotten a lot better. But
Yeah.
I think that's really our conversation here. We could talk about, why there's this divide, right, between proprietary data not getting the same kind of love, right? Privacy. We talked about what is privacy data, PCI, PHI, very easy to define and capture and classify, right? Social security numbers got nine digits. It's easy to figure out where are the social security numbers sitting in my data stack. What do we need to do to protect them? We told the board and C-suite we're going to protect these things because if we don't, we'll get in trouble by regulators, right? It's harder to do that for proprietary data. There's a lot more nuance. There's a lot more fuzziness, as John and I like to talk about, in terms of like what is valuable data from the proprietary side. Chances are it's probably not insurable, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe your coverage covers that, but think about most post-breach. What is the focus on? It's usually on privacy data, right? Like getting in trouble. Post litigation, you have to do credit monitoring on individuals, right? Like everything's still focused on this like privacy aspect. So, any thoughts on that, Ryan? In terms of why we named this podcast kind of what we did, and why there's this big divide, I think, really in terms of these two data types.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's a compliance thing. So we have rules that guide how certain types of information must be protected and the standards that they must be protected to. And then there's the litigation on the back end of it whenever that information is compromised in some way. So I think it almost feels as if that's the motivation behind security in general. And I think we should take a look at security holistically and consider all bits and pieces of data and information that we have, whether it's PHI, PCI, personal information, PII, and proprietary information. I mean, it's all about securing the organization, securing the employees, securing the clients, and doing the things required to secure it, not just comply with some regulation or some standard out in the corporate environment.
Awesome. Yeah. John, any follow-ups on that? These were my thoughts I put on the slide, right? Like if someone steals your proprietary data, there's not a lot of regulations that are going to say you're in trouble. There's not a lot of regulations that say you need to disclose your proprietary data breach, just like there was, when you leak social security numbers, when you leak credit cards. The damages aren't probably immediate, right? Like you can't say personal data was breached. Like that employee who walked out with the deck that builds a company and starts a new successful unicorn, that might not materialize for 4 or 5 years. So like I said, this idea of proprietary data and what's valuable and what's kind of misappropriated or runs out the door. It's, like I said, regulation, the immediacy of it, the insurability of it, the breach, the breach duty, the duty to disclose that there was a breach. It's really not there. And it seems like, employees walk out with things all the time and probably don't get caught. So what are your thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, I just want to give you a quote actually on NDAs.
Awesome.
It's from a US lawyer. There is, however, an inherent problem with non-disclosure agreements. You can have all the non-disclosure provisions in the world, but if your key person goes to work for one of your competitors and has access to information that is directly competitive, that is directly valuable to the company and works for a direct competitor, I don't think any NDAs are going to protect that information. And although people will say they will abide by an NDA, I don't believe it. And this is from a top trade secrets lawyer. So I think if you take that as your premise, and we come back to your fuzzy information definition, what is this information and what is flowing and how is it flowing and who's looking after it? It's a fiduciary duty in the United States, Tim and Ryan, that if you have a data hack, data breach, you have to, within 8 days, I think it is 10 days, 7 days, something like that, fill in some form. It might be called an 8K to report what's been taken. Right? I don't know. I don't know any companies have done that as yet. You'll probably know better than I. But that sort of suggests to me that either two things. One, they don't want to reveal that they've had. Most people don't want to reveal they've had a breach, right? First and foremost. Secondarily, if they do, they probably don't know what's been breached. And that comes back to the sort of identification, data tagging, and so on and so forth. And then just picking up on something that I think you were mentioning, Ryan. In the UK, we have ISO 27001, and I guess in the US, Tim, you work on SOC 2 quite a lot. But ultimately, it's down to, it's not about the training. Well, it is about the training. And it's not about the sort of compliance with various standards. It's about the lived experience. And I was at a trade secrets conference last week, and we were under Chatham House rules, but I don't think this is an issue to reveal. Siemens actually said they train all of their people every year on trade secrets and IP, because it's not a one-off. It has to be a lived experience. People have to understand that you give that information away. That could be profit impacting. That could impact your bonus. That might even be existential for your line of business, etc. And until that sort of inculcates the culture of the organization, then you are at risk all the time. And that comes back to one of the themes today, and that's the insider threat, which I know you have a big issue with, Ryan, and you can come to that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I'll dive into that, and I think we could probably go. I could skip ahead a slide. I think insider threat might be how we describe how trade secrets, are misappropriated, right? And it's a little bit of a loaded term, and I'd love for Ryan to kind of jump on that one, but. Let me skip ahead. I think I have a slide on that. Yeah. What is insider threat, right? So, why don't you jump on that? Why don't you clear the air a little bit, Ryan?
Well, I'd love to address the previous slide before I move into insider.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, falling through the gaps. Yep.
The falling into the gaps, because you had cybersecurity, risk, and HR outlined. But if we take a look at a corporate security program, a holistic security program, we actually see that security, and especially whenever it comes to information security, proprietary data, the compliance data that we have that's regulated. You have information security, you have cybersecurity, physical security wrapped around that. You have personnel security, and then you also have operation security when your employees are out doing this thing, and then compliance is wrapped around that as well. So what we're actually looking at when you say falls in the gaps, I think is a very important point that needs to be highlighted, because if all of these different security functions and HR and legal and compliance are not talking to each other, things do fall through the gap, because there might be something relevant that happens on an HR side. We'll see insider threats. I hate that term, but we'll see, people that are doing bad things within the organization. There is a triggering event that typically happens. They got passed over for promotion. They didn't get the pay raise they expected. They have a falling out with their boss. And then it translates over, and we start to see the activity on the cybersecurity and the risk side. So there's huge gaps between all of these different security functions that happen in the corporate environment. Now, I like to say that counterintelligence is the glue that binds all of this together. So we're taking a look externally at the threats that are attempting to try to collect and gather that information, whether it's nation states, criminal organizations, competitors, business competitors, or just an individual that wants to go set up his own company. And then we're taking a look at the inside of the organization to see if there's any indication or any type of activity moving in that direction. So we try to fill the gap with counterintelligence, and that's what we did in the government. and it was highly effective. Totally different scenario where in government we have true data classification programs. We have information that's segmented off in different network environments. And then you also had a personal security program that was continuous monitoring and vetted. Now, did we still have problems within that environment? Absolutely. But it's way better than what I've seen done on the corporate side. And I think we could do much better if we kind of learned from the government and employed that in a corporate environment. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to address this slide. If there's any rebuttal or any clarification, please feel free to beat me up.
No, not at all. I'll actually pile on a little bit, and John, I think, will as well. It's very interesting, right? So you have IP attorneys, right, who work with general counsel and legal. I should put legal on here as well. You've got conferences that talk about HR, and then you have like trade secret conferences, which John just recently attended, I think last week. And the people in that room aren't necessarily, cybersecurity people. And then the cybersecurity people talking about insider threat, which I've gone to several, call it conferences or roundtables, aren't maybe there's a lot. Generally, you don't see like the legal people there, or the HR people. So the overlap between these groups and talking about this very problem, which I think is a very big deal, that is largely, as we just said on the prior slides, why isn't it disclosed? Why isn't it showing up in, figures, right? We do hear about like insider threat, which I think is much of the problem because it's getting misclassified as a different problem. But what we're talking about right here is what John just talked about, 90% of the company's value is intangibles, and are we actually protecting it? So, John, you want to jump on that before we jump into insider threat?
No, I'm really looking forward to Ryan's sort of piece on insider threat. I mean, just at this conference, there's a company in the world with an enormous number of trade secrets, and it's like several 100,000. And the assistant general counsel, been doing trade secret programs since 2013, and several 100,000 trade secrets. And he basically says 80% of my risk is insider threat. 80% of my risk of information, sensitive information, leaving this organization is from people inside the business. And that's what he's extremely focused on, that and ensuring he gets, on the other side, really good innovation. But yeah, 80% of his threat he sees as insider. So over to you, Ryan, on the terms. We should use a different term.
Yeah. So, and one more thing before you jump into that, Ryan, I challenge anyone who's listening to this podcast to do a job description look on insider threat, use that term, then do one on privacy, and then do one on trade secret protection or something like that. Well, you will see the job descriptions are very defined, and these silos are not being broken. So go ahead. Yeah, here's a good one on insider threat, which is our favorite term. Yeah.
Yes, I love this term so much. So I actually remember the first time I ever heard the term insider threat. And it was in November of 2008. I was in the Heidelberg Military Intelligence Field Office. I was running a counterintelligence program in support of U.S. Army Europe. And a memo came across our desk that said, okay, from now on out, Army counterintelligence will be the proponent for insider threat. Now, of course, you can imagine that created quite the dust up in the Army counterintelligence community because nobody had ever heard of an insider threat. I mean, we were used to dealing with spies and terrorists, and international, arms traffickers and drug lords and that sort of thing. But here's this new term, insider threat. So the first thing we did was send back a response of, okay, please define the insider threat. Because what is it? If you ask 10 different insider threat professionals, they'll tell you 10 different answers. Well, it's workplace violence. It's, self-motivated domestic terrorism. It's international terrorists, it's spies. It's the person that breaks into the Burger King, in the local community. I mean, it's anything that you want the insider threat to be. And so I think by misnaming it insider threat, we've actually done a great deal of damage, to the overall security community. Now, I know that since then, whole industries have been spawned to address this thing called the insider threat. And most of it's been looked at from a cybersecurity standpoint. You have data loss prevention tools, you have logging, you have all of these different things. But we know, depending on what classification of insider threat you're looking at, and there's probably a dozen, the risks and threats are going to unfold in like dramatically, significantly different ways. And I'll just give you, for instance, people that are going to do workplace violence. They're going to communicate a threat verbally to somebody. It's not going to be caught in cybersecurity logs. They're going to make a social media post that communicates that they're going to do something significant and drastic. They may even have a manifesto that they post online. And so that's totally different than the insider threat that's a data thief or, stealing your intellectual property and going to walk it over to your competitor. And so by just bundling all of this up, you're asking a security professional to understand and know how each one of these insider threats are going to unfold. And I think it's done significant damage to the overall security architecture that we have in the community. So I don't like the term. I know some people have hung their hat on it, but I wish we would get back to calling things and classifying different threats and risk as appropriately. And that's my soapbox. I'm going to get off of it. I know I'm about to get a bunch of hate mail. Oh, actually, it's already coming in on LinkedIn.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, Ryan, you didn't even mention the negligent insider threat, right? So, like, if you pull up an article right now, they'll tell you that insider threat is $9 trillion, whatever, right? And when they say negligent, they meant like, I fell for a phishing link, right? Like, and I'm human error. Well, cybersecurity, I mean, computers do what they're told. Like, isn't all of cybersecurity human error somewhere? like misconfigurations, excessive access, right? Like they call it human error, right? So I think, once again, you just mentioned kind of like, like a sabotage or a spy, as opposed to someone who's maybe didn't know that, like, I can take this deck with me to the next employee and do a better job of my job or help the company, right? So, as you said, these intents are vastly different, and they're all under the same umbrella. They're getting published in reports, so.
And I think as we talk about, if we're going to talk about, say, from a counterintelligence perspective, and this is the one that I mainly focus on, I'm looking at that person that's going to steal your intellectual property or proprietary information and walk out the door with it. That also includes institutional knowledge. I mean, just being in contact with the conversations that you have with other experts within the corporate environment, that information is proprietary too. And as John alluded to, the NDA is great, but who abides by that, and how do you enforce it? It's so hard to do these days anyhow. I mean, it's nice. You can threaten people with it as they walk out the door, but they still already have inside information to all of the inner workings of whatever company they're leaving, and they're taking it to the next place. So we can start to see, if we classify it correctly and get away from this insider threat term, and go with something different. I'm used to the word spy. Maybe that's not appropriate, but I mean, if we just take a look at that person that's going to take your intellectual property, now we can start doing pattern analysis. We can start having real conversations with HR. We can have real conversations with executives. Actually, we can get ahead of it. We could be proactive in it just through like culture surveys. You show me the team within your organization that has the lowest culture score or has what they call toxic leadership. I will tell you that's where you're going to find the most turnover, one. And number two, that's where all of your intellectual property is going to flow out the organization, or that's the highest risk of having intellectual property flow out. So, I mean, I think there's proactive steps that we could take if we classify it right and get away from this nebulous term of insider threat. So again, soapbox issue, but I think it's very, very important and critical that we get to an understanding of what we're actually dealing with and then address it appropriately.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, is the what exactly are we talking about, right? So, and as I said, I think it's the those intentions and behaviors, and you just mentioned culture, which is huge in terms of call it left of boom, right? And people use that term in cybersecurity, being proactive, being preventative, being hardening, as opposed to right of boom, trying to hunt these things down and find them afterwards, right? Right. And a lot of, so going back to what I was saying about looking at insider threat jobs, you'll find, I think, or you'll find inside threat hunters, right, that are looking, likely more right of boom as well. Like, oh, maybe we can use user behavior analytics and patterns and things like that. So I, it's always harder to find things afterwards, right? So
It is, and we have an over reliance on the technology. I mean, it's great. I love the technology. I love data loss prevention. I love UABA platforms. I'm not throwing shade on any of those, but they're not the end all be all. And just for a couple of examples with DLP, I would, I could almost tell. I could tell from Friday afternoon about 18 or 6 p.m. in the evening when everybody goes home to Monday at 6 a.m. I would manually pull the logs from the DLP solution and go through them manually because that would help me identify gaps in our data DLP alerts and settings, our rule set. And what we would see is signaling events. It's an employee that sends an email from their work email address to their personal email address with the word test only. Well, that's a signaling event. I mean, we know that something's following that.
sure.
Another good one is resume. They would send their resume out over the weekend. It always happened between the hours of Friday at 6 p.m. to Monday at 6 a.m. And it typically happened on Saturday. And I think it's psychological that they think, okay, well, nobody's monitoring my network activity over the weekend. And so you'll start to see these data exfiltration events happening on Saturday. And on Monday morning, we would just block it off and war room it. And then we can identify who are the people that were going to leave, who are the people that were disgruntled, and who were the people that were going to steal your intellectual property. Now, if we know that ahead of time, if we're proactive in our approach, we can get ahead of this, maybe even have a conversation with them or shut their network access off or however that works. But there's a lot of things that we can do if we're not over reliant on alerts and incident response and move to a proactive approach to securing the organization.
Awesome. Yeah, and I have a slide here at the end, Ryan, that you can kind of jump in and talk about. Maybe we'll talk about how this all fits together, right? The employee contracts. John can talk about NDAs and IP acknowledgement and that recurring training, and kind of like as you said, how do you merge the deterrence and the kind of behavior nudges, we'll call it. And then, as you said, I think it's great you're getting signals as well. Corporate America, you're not reading the signals that this guy's sending his resume out over a weekend. He's probably not happy there. So, are his incentives aligned? Is he making enough money? Is he happy at his job? Right. So, I think it's all. I think this all fits together, and these
And
silos.
those points you raised, those couple of points you raised there, Tim, are
Yeah.
absolutely fundamental, aren't they? And it comes down to having a happier employee who's productive and is engaged and has got objectives and so on and so forth. And every other aspect is satisfied. So just a quick question for you, Ryan. How do you balance the sort of sense of the snooper, looking at my activity versus, keeping me motivated and engaged? How do you balance that in an organization with your sort of access to my
Yeah.
my exfiltration activities on a Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. And, it's one of those necessary evils. Now, understanding that employees come into an organization and consent to this monitoring. And we do monitor, even if it's not a manual process, but we have cybersecurity technologies all across the board, and they're being monitored. Employees are also monitored by their managers. They're monitored by their coworkers. So it can get to be too big brotherish. And I think that there's points in time when it should be switched on and points of time where you leave it alone. And I'll tell you some great examples. During bonus and evaluation time, you need to really start honing in on your manual searches, because that's whenever the greatest amount of turnover is going to happen. When there's any rumors of layoffs or significant reductions in forces and that sort of thing, you've got to switch on the manual look. And other significant events, for example, a CEO that's going to turn over, or another key leader within the executive team is going to walk away. People start to feel anxiety and angst about the future. I think whenever you have those times within the organization, or when the culture is bad, you need to start switching on the manual. Is it a big brotherish? Yeah, slightly, but we have to take steps to mitigate our risk. And the key point to all of it, especially from my point of view, is discretion, being as discreet as possible, and having oversight and control from legal and HR to make sure that we don't overstep our boundaries. And if we have oversight and control from the legal and HR departments, we have the prosecutor, which is legal, and we have the defending counsel, which is HR, and we can work through that situation to make sure that we're not violating anybody's privacy rights.
Yeah, right. Good answer. Good answer. It's a fine balance, but as you say, I keep coming back to personally, the day you enter the company, the day you start the company, you sit down, and HR, whoever invites you in, welcomes you in, talks you through the above. What you create here is owned by us. These are the stipulations about what you can and can't do with our data. And then as they leave, same sort of conversation, all recorded, of course, because that way you've got evidential proof that the person did have a reasonable level of understanding, supported by everything else, of course, contracts and training and so on. Yeah, very, very interesting.
Well, I think, and we talked about this before we went live, but I think it actually starts before the hiring process, before the onboarding process.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in most cases, during the hiring process, security is not brought in. So there's very rarely a security review of any background checks or any previous information, a resume scrub, that sort of thing. It's all done at the HR level. And I love HR folks. I mean, they're fantastic. But once that employee is hired and given access, security now inherits the problem. And so unless we have some buy-in in the hiring process, before we bring somebody on board, I think it's unfair to the security professional to have expectations that they're going to protect an organization. Now, what is an individual? So they have their own personality traits, their own motivations, their own vulnerabilities. They have significant life events that they're taking care of. From a security standpoint, especially from a counterintelligence standpoint, we have to have an understanding of what that is, because that all of those different things bring risk. And as security and risk managers, not knowing beforehand and inheriting it after the fact puts us in a very reactive state.
Yep. So I jumped into this busy slide, but I think just for argument's sake here, John knows the red boxes pretty well from an IP advisor and strategy perspective. And then a lot of the tools here, I'm missing some, Ryan. Certainly enforcing those policies, governance, directives, whatever you want to call them, best practices really of getting these things in place, as you said, kind of onboard, pre-onboard, as you said, the hiring process, which is even better, kind of figuring out what the outcomes are. And I'll step back a little here, but John, for most of the audience, I think most of them are pretty savvy listeners, understand what proprietary data is and what actually falls under trade secret protection, right? So you can enforce, right? Like, so we're talking about any kind of data, right? Failure data, customer logs,
absolutely,
right? Yeah. Customer lists, anything's proprietary. If you don't want to, if you wouldn't publish it on your LinkedIn page right now, it's covered under trade secret law, and it should be covered under IP acknowledgement, non-confidentiality agreements, like all these red boxes, right? And getting that employee, I think, in the right spot from day one of what their expectations are and what their duties are. And also, I think, Ryan, informing them, by the way, we're not only telling you this is your duty, but like we're also trust but verify. We're going to use modern cybersecurity tools to monitor this, monitor compliance, right? Monitor, we're going to look at logs and hopefully we'll make it obvious as well. Like we're going to have cybersecurity training. And then when you try to send something you're not allowed to send, you're not allowed to send outside of the company, you're going to get a little pop-up, right? A little toast, right? It says, are you sure you want to send this proprietary data out the door into a competitor? I don't know, maybe a partner, maybe a colleague. So like I said, holistically, this is a busy chart, but it all kind of fits together. And a lot of these roles, as we said, HR, legal, risk, they all need to work together to build a cohesive culture, right? So people understand they understand the IP is important, understand, as I said, every organization has IP. It could be a municipality, right? It doesn't have to be a corporation, it could be any kind of organization. I think, go ahead, John. Yeah.
I think, back to your point earlier that it's fuzzy. Every organization has IP. Most organizations and most specialists, engineers devalue what they've done, right? It's not that important. It's not that valuable. And then when you get a patents attorney to look at it, they go, wow. Or you get somebody who really is knowledgeable on innovation, they go, yes, this is definitely an inventive step. This is definitely a move forward. This is really valuable information. But I think if people devalue what they do, that is an issue to start with. And so I did mention to him, and I just want to step back to this. What is the definition of a trade secret, and what criteria?
I just was going to ask you that. I was like, trade secret's a loaded term as well, because people think it's the Coca-Cola recipe in the vault, right?
And they go, listen, I'm not Ryan Rambo. I'm not James Bond. I'm not in corporate espionage. I'm not a spy. So that doesn't relate to me whatsoever. So I think that is an issue. I think it's a terminology issue as well, Ryan. I'd welcome your thoughts on that. But just very quickly, so trade secrets definition, very simple. It's business-related, commercial, customer list, profitability information, or technical information. Secondly, it must not be widely known, i.e. it's a secret. And the company's taking steps and measures, reasonable measures is the term, to maintain its secrecy, right? Then thirdly, the fact that it's a secret must have actual or potential economic value advantage to the business. So if all of those steps are met, it's a trade secret. So it's very, very broad. And then I just wanted to touch on the US courts, look at something called EONA proofs, EONA proofs. Did the trade, this is where most fall over. Yeah, we've had a trade secret theft. This happened to Zunum. They went to court with Boeing. They won $72 million. Boeing appealed. They said, we don't think there's no evidential proof that trade secret was there in 2017 or whenever it was. And Zunum fell over. They couldn't demonstrate that they had it. They probably did, but they didn't document it. They didn't date stamp it. They didn't have that existence information that we would stand up in court. And without that, you don't have a trade secret case. And this is what, go back to my original point. Yes, we've got trade secrets, and yes, we're taking care of proprietary information. Are you really? Would it stand up in court? Can you show it exists at a certain point in time? Can you demonstrate irrefutably that you own it, or there's clear ownership here? Was notification there? Were people trained? Were they contracted? Were they put on notice that this was a trade secret? And per your point, from the cyber and the information side, did they have access? Do we have demonstrable proof that they accessed and they were able to sort of exfiltrate this particular piece of information? Because without those, no case. And so most cases are falling over at the moment on, did it exist? Was it documented? Is it date stamped? Did it exist on the 5th of May 2017 or whatever it was? Because without it, You're going to lose your 72 million. And these are big cases, Tim. And we talked about this back in the day when we were doing the patents. There was some big settlements and several hundreds of million. Well, trade secret cases are enormous by comparison now. I mean, I was looking back to 2008 with the Kevlar case when an employee left the business, joined a competitor, 922 million. 922 million, 18 months in jail for the perpetrators, significant. And then we just had a couple of recent cases. Hytera is classic amongst those cases, and I can talk about that, but that's the extraterritorial aspect of trade secrets. So yes, it happened in the States, but we're going to take it to where else this information flow to Singapore and to China as well, and we're going to seek recourse from those jurisdictions as well. What was the big one? The Pega versus Appian, a $2 billion case. $2 billion case. Apparently, somebody was a spy, was put in the competitor organization for 10 years to feed information back. 10 years. So
Yeah.
Tim, so definition of trade secret, really important, and having demonstrable evidence that it is a trade secret. You're taking those steps. If you haven't taken those steps, it's not going to stand up in court. You don't have recourse.
Yes. So doing a lot of these best practices here on the left, right? You're going to have a good case 4 years down the road. And I think it's even wider than that. You said commercial value, right? Like a lot of times we're not thinking it has commercial value, but like I said, failure data. What are the things we tried that took 6 months that cost a couple $1 million that didn't work out? That has extreme value, right? Like a competitor finds that out and they're like, heck, we could just skip ahead, right? Like,
and I guarantee that information is given away really lightly all of the time because perceptibly, fuzzily, it doesn't have value.
Yeah, and there you talked about some of the federal cases, but there's state courts as well, and employee contract law starts to like overlap here, right? Like in terms of employee obligations, right? Like the battle's being fought in different jurisdictions, different courts. So some are a little easier on marking things as you have to say that was in the trade secret ledger or whatnot. And some of them are just like, oh, this guy violated his employee agreement. So,
yeah. And as we, the erosion of non-competes, Tim, we talked about this previously, it's really trade secrets, and what you guys do from the data side and the tracking side and the security side is so important in order to be able to monitor access and demonstrate to prove that there has been a breach and so on.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I actually had to fill out a deposition for court because the court didn't believe that we were monitoring everybody in the organization, that this was that we didn't have the capability or the desire to do that monitoring. And you see on the right-hand side, I actually had to pull each one of the tools that we were using by name, what their purpose was, and then how we use the alerting to track and monitor user activity across the network. And so it's critically important for us to support your case by proving out that what we do on the right-hand side of this chart is actually taking place.
So one other point I want to make here, which I think is interesting. So what is it going to cost to put in a lot of what we just talked about, I think in the last 20 minutes, in terms of trade secret protection, proprietary data protection? If you notice, that most of these elements already exist, right? Everyone has employment agreements. Everyone has the cyber tools. And I think it's just stepping back and saying, we're going to focus on proprietary data as well as privacy data, in terms of leakage. So I don't think this is that expensive. I think that you can put in many of the elements that you need to prevail in a trade secret case if you actually do get in one a couple of years down the road. And it's really important, right? Like you can put these elements in. They're already here. How do you tune them? How do you point them? How do you use the talents that Ryan's learned over the last 30 years in terms of protecting all data, right? So
Tim, very quickly, if I may just jump in, fundamental to the whole of this for me is identifying the valuable information. It doesn't take long. You can sit down over lunch and you can go, okay, so what would we least like to lose? What would we least like the competitor to get their hands on? How at risk are we of losing that information at the moment? And there suddenly you start to get some priorities from there. So, what is the sensitive and valuable information? And then Tim, I'd really like to hear about and Ryan, from your side, how you tag that, and then how you arguably hide it. Because I'm really concerned now for my for businesses at the moment, because if you haven't identified the sensitive information, the valuable information, tagged it, processed it, secured it, then AI tools are going to be finding it before you even realize that it was valuable and making use of it. And so, I really would just like to hear from you guys how you tag data and then how you. So we've tagged this is a trade secret,
Yep.
top secret, most sensitive information. How do we then hide it from external sort of AI tools and so on? How do we make sure it's masked or it's hidden? What technology is there to support in that area?
I'm glad we made it 49 minutes without talking about AI.
Sorry.
Yeah, this is great, right? Like we really kind of laid down the fundamentals, and now we're kind of running into this bee swarm of what AI could be. I'll let Ryan speak, but I mean, generally, like I said earlier, it's very easy to tag 9-digit social security numbers, credit card numbers, whatnot, and call that critical data from a traditional risk management cybersecurity perspective. But when it comes to proprietary data and labeling it, it's very hard. I've seen some really cool solutions out there that are using LLMs, and we can get into like, should I even turn an LLM on before that? But Ryan, you want to jump on that one, maybe?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's a problem, especially for a company that's been around for 30 years. Trying to go back through all of that data and tagging it, 30 years worth of data. I mean, it could be 16, 17 terabytes worth of information, just data floating around, in different locations. But I have seen some really cool tools that are entering the market that you can do keyword searches. Like, hey, if it says financial or dollar or, PHI or something like that, it can go through your network and tag that information. Now, is it 100%? No. But even if we get to a 60, 70% solution, we're still better off than we were yesterday. So some great tools on the market. If anybody's interested in learning about that, just reach out to me. I don't want to put it on public space and be an advertisement for them, but I do know that they're out there and that they're working. But again, if you don't understand what it is that you have to protect, very, very difficult to protect.
Yeah, and I've spoken to corporations giving some paid speeches, and this is starting to overlap a little bit with like innovation programs, right? Like tagging things and labeling things that you think are important. It isn't as a manual exercise. It's almost impossible to like reverse kind of 30 years of sunken data that's unstructured, unsorted, untagged, unclassified. A lot of the solutions I'm seeing are just in time, right? So they're popping up like while you try to send an email, while you try to kind of send it out the door. One of the boxes on the right here has managed browser, DLP, SIM, like all solutions that Ryan deals with. Like these things are looking at the data flow in motion, not at rest, right? Like and trying to stop it there. But still, all very important elements of supplying, a trade secret attorney or, making sure that the culture is in place. And I love what Ryan said as well about kind of like seeing the tea leaves and like realizing, left the boom before there is a problem. A lot of these things are great deterrents, right? And they're the smoking gun if there is a trade secret case. Like there was a pop-up and a toast that basically said, don't send this, and you sent it anyway, and you knew you were under obligation. So, there's a lot you can do to position yourself to protect proprietary data. So, John, I know we're running out of time here, but one more thought before maybe we go into last thoughts.
Yeah, I have a sort of. I'm actually really interested, Ryan. Classification of trade secrets, classification of sensitive information, and what was what do you think is best? I run with very simple: top secret, secret, confidential, and then either public and published, or just public. Because information moves down, and eventually it's going to be public or published potentially. What do you and I'm doing that primarily on the proprietary information side of things, but I recognize also that over here in the organization there's an information security side of things that has some form of classification as well, and ideally we're going to bring those together. So I just wonder what your best practice is on classification, what you think is a good sort of standard, and how we bring privacy into proprietary from a classification side.
Well, I'm glad you waited to ask me the easy question last. No, but I agree with you. I'm more comfortable with top secret, secret, and confidential. That's what we used in the government, and it was all based off of damage. Top secret, if it was compromised, it would cause severe damage. Secret, some damage, and confidential, okay, it'd be damaging, but we'll get past it. We need to define those same terms in the corporate environment. And I have seen it where it's proprietary, no release, trade secret, no release, confidential, and then for a lack of a better word, instead of unclassified, they would just say, public use or something like that. Yeah. I don't like those terms as much. I don't think it speaks to the amount of damage that losing that information can cause. So if I was to give advice, I would love to go with some top secret, confidential classifications. And I think it's important too, because if you're going to interact with law enforcement in any way, and these cases are illegal, we have to have common terms that we can talk back and forth to our government partners with. And whenever we tell them that, hey, this is a trade secret, and they're like, okay, well, what does that mean to me? Just say, okay, it's top secret. Now they get it. And I think it just makes it easier if we're speaking in common terms.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah.
Couple minutes left here. Go around the horn. Closing thoughts. John, you want to go first?
I feel like this is such a fascinating area. I really want to do some more in this area. I think it's bringing together two worlds, but as you said, Tim, it's not. It's, what did you say? Minding the gap between legal, information security, cybersecurity, proprietary information, HR, business, R&D, engineering. It's a big ask. It's bringing all of those different parts of a business together on one theme, which ultimately to me is culture. But that's not an easy thing to achieve. So I'm going to let Ryan conclude and you conclude on how to do that.
Oh, another easy question. No, thank you so much. I think this is an important conversation. I would love to talk maybe in future iterations about operations security. What is it like when an employee takes their laptop, mobile device, and travels to a high-risk country? Those operational things, when they attend a conference, when they're going to other client sites, and that sort of thing. Because I think it's as important as cybersecurity, but it gets neglected because it's just doing business. But fascinating talk. I could do this all day. I just love it that much. So thank you, John. Thank you, Tim, for inviting me on. Fascinating conversation.
Awesome. So I'll wrap up. And I think one thing I want to point out is that this is a tremendously big opportunity as well. I think we tried to illustrate that it is a problem. Proprietary data protection is also a massive opportunity for IP attorneys, for CISOs to talk about why they need more budget, why they need, what they're actually protecting. Because I think this largely gets, even in terms of risk management, if you look at a risk ledger and, you're looking at what's the holistic risk of the business, I think this gets missed, right? Like the key elements of this. And so I think it's a huge opportunity for legal. It's a huge opportunity for cyber, external, IP counsel. John and I are really, we're really excited about this. I think it hasn't been a straight road either, right? Like it's been a little bit of trying to understand kind of what is the problem, who needs to be involved, what are the key elements. And Ryan, your detail and kind of you being on boots on the ground and understanding what's really effective, I think it's been really helpful as well. So, but after that, that's all I got. I can't wait to have you guys on. Thank you again for coming. And I'd love to talk about the operational aspects, because I think, how do you do this is the more people know, the more they can implement it and build, as we said, a strong cybersecurity, IP, and data protection culture. So until next time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers now.